Hello, my name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan, and today we're going to be talking about the holidays. Now, this is a subject that is not consistent across the pagan, heathen, Asatru community. Every group and individual seems to do something slightly different, and this can make it really hard for someone that is just getting into the faith, or even for people that have been in the faith for years, to understand what holidays should we celebrate. Obviously, with Yule coming up, Yule is one of the most talked about holidays amongst the northern religion community, and definitely one of the ones we know the most about. But when I was doing my research and my deep dive into the individual holy days that we have within the faith and within our modern practice, within my research, I have found that we have very little historical evidence to back what the pre-Christian societies actually did in Germany and Scandinavia as far as their holiday practices. As with most of my research videos, I will be presenting the facts to you, the information I have found within my deep dive. And at the very end, I will present my opinion along with what my conclusions. But for the most part, I want to present the information to you, that way you can draw your own conclusions, and then I will add in what I think. Now, moving forward, the two books I'm using for reference is A Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru and Asatru for Beginners. I will leave links to these down below. The difference between these two books, Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru, is going to give you what most of us have heard as the holidays. And it's going to give great detail on what we do for those holidays. But when comparing that with Beginner's Guide to Asatru by Mathias Nordvig, this comes from a historical perspective. Mathias does a really good job at describing what we know of the past and how that influences our present. So this is a very no BS description of the heathen holidays, and this is more of the modern interpretation. So I'm going to be going through the list of holidays that we know that are most talked about. All sources I have used as far as these books and the internet websites I have used will be listed in the description if you would like to check them out for yourself. But I did reference a few Asatru groups as far as what holidays they practice. And I found very inconsistent numbers. I found certain groups have 29 holy days, others 22, some 9, some 8. These books each mention holidays that the other one doesn't mention. So there is a huge inconsistency across the board, and it seems like some of the holidays have mixed, some have intermingled to create others, and it's very confusing. So I hope this video helps make these things a little bit more clear for someone coming into the faith for the first time. Without further ado, I'm going ahead and move into the holidays that are most commonly practiced within the community at large and the ones that were most mentioned within the research I was doing. So starting at the top of the year, in February, you have the Charming of the Plough or Disting. Often celebrated at the beginning of February, but I also found people that celebrated it at the end of February and some even into March. But mostly this was an agriculture-based celebration of just, chasing away winter, celebrating the end of winter, and preparing for the planting season coming ahead. So the Charming of the Plough, blessing your instruments for use, blessing your, plows, blessing your cows, blessing your chickens, to have a good year ahead of time. Disting is actually a separate holiday, it seems, near the Charming of the Plough, that is about celebrating the ancestors, specifically the Disir, the female ancestor spirits, and those two kind of merge on the same day, it seems like, in most heathen pagan groups. Now, historically, going into this, was it historically practiced? Yes and no. In the research I did, it seems like there was a celebration around spring. Now, because that's simply because most pagan societies, most world societies have some form of holiday in the spring to celebrate the coming, the end of winter, moving into the warmer months, and also most societies in pre-Christian days were based off of agriculture, and even moving into Christian days. So it can be inferred that most societies had a spring holiday. It seems like that's where the similarities kind of stop, because moving into the next holiday, this is one that of course was mentioned in A Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru, is Ostara or Estor. Basically, it's not something that was practiced by the pre-Christian Scandinavian Germanic societies. Now, Ostara and Estor, I'm not pronouncing this right probably, but it's an Anglo-Saxon term, and yes, there are connections there, but there's nothing historically backing that this was the celebration. Mathias kind of talks about it in the Beginner's Guide, that there was a spring goddess with the Norse, but it was so lightly mentioned that we can't exactly say if that was the correct goddess or, being for spring, or if there was any of this specific ritual at all. So spring definitely seems like there was something around February, March, or April to actually signify spring was coming. Whether that is Ostara or Disting or Charming the Plough, is kind of up in the air, and it seems like all three of these are kind of celebrated around the same time. Another holiday is May Day, or Walpurgisnacht. Okay, I'm gonna have to put my glasses on for this one. I apologize. I'm trying to learn German. It's not going well. It'd be Walpurgisnacht. Walpurgisnacht? I'm butchering it no matter how I'm saying it. I apologize, but I've seen this is practiced among some groups. The only thing with that is it's definitely not mentioned in this book, and it's very apparent that this was an attempt by pagan groups grabbing something that was Christian, like this is a celebration of a saint, and turning it into the spring fertility festival. It's kind of that place marker. Again, it's a spring festival. It is a Christian thing that has been turned back into the representation of pagan fertility. You know, just be wary. Some groups definitely seem to practice Walpurgisnacht, but it definitely isn't something that is historic. Now, moving into Midsummer. Midsummer was something I thought was very common, and definitely, you know, going into this, I was like, well, of course, Midsummer was definitely worshipped by the pre-Christian Scandinavian societies. And again, it doesn't seem like that. Now, Midsummer is something that is practiced by modern, you know, Scandinavians, specifically in Sweden. The maypole has become something that's very synonymous of this. The maypole actually came from Germany in about 1500 to Sweden and was actually originally placed with a cross, and then eventually this got turned into the solar wheel, but the maypole is a Christian concept, so it appears, at least in the research I have done. But that doesn't mean that Midsummer wasn't a thing in pre-Christian Scandinavia. It just means that it probably wasn't how we worship it now. So obviously I worship Midsummer, and you know, most heathen groups have a Midsummer festival. The things I have found as far as what happens during Midsummer is mostly bonfires, feasting, celebration. It's a summer festival celebrating the long sunlight, and there was also a recurring theme of jumping over a bonfire. Once again, it doesn't seem like this was historic. It just seems like that there was most likely a summer festival, and it eventually changed and evolved into a modern heathen festival, but just wasn't necessarily something the ancestors would have done. You're starting to see a theme, aren't you? There are several small reoccurring things amongst August, September, if there was a festival around there. I've seen things mentioning a Freyarsblot. I've seen things missing a Sigurdsblot. I've seen dozens of different things that are all kind of interwoven in this area, but as far as I can tell, there is no one thing that most people tend to celebrate between August and September, at least in the historic research and at the heathen community at large. It just seems like some people do have some form of offering or ritual in this time. Moving into the fall time, and quite simply in Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru, it just calls it the Harvest Bloat, or the Harvest Festival. Whereas some groups actually label this as disting. There are a few that think that disting is actually in fall. This is also the time of winter nights. This is also the time of Alphabloat. So there are a lot of holidays floating around in here, but once again, there seems to be a theme of a fall harvest festival. Historically, we don't know that much. Again, you're seeing the theme. Historically, we do not know that much about a fall festival. It's kind of shrouded in mystery, but from what we can gather from pre-Christian Scandinavian and Germanic societies, there was most likely some form of festival. It's just hard to say what it is. One of the things I have found in the research is a connection to Halloween. I don't know if this is something that is community broad. It seems like there were mentionings of a Decemberblot connection with the Day of the Dead, Halloween, honoring the ancestors. I found this in Myths and Symbols in Pagan Europe, the other book. I actually don't have it with me right now, but it talked about the Germanic peoples having some form of Remembrance Day for the dead around November 1st. Now, celebrations for this in the modern heathen community seem to be mostly around drinking, modern Oktoberfesty themes, giving offerings of the best of your crop, giving the best offerings of beer, mead, pork, grain, and things like that. I've seen several mentionings of leaving offerings for Sleipnir, going into the wild hunt, including stalks of wheat left over from the harvest. Once again, just seems like there isn't a lot of hard evidence to suggest that there was a heathen holiday, at least back in pre-Christian times, but it seems like most of us now have some form of holiday around this time. Moving deeper into Yule, I do want to mention Winter Nights a little bit, because Winter Nights is definitely something that comes up quite a bit. Most groups tend to have a Winter Nights celebration, and most individuals seem to have a Winter Nights celebration of some kind. Now, what is involved with this, again, is not based off of anything historical, at least in my research or what I have found, but it seems like winter nights is a time to move everything from the outside inside and prepare for the coming winter. Again, I hope you're starting to see some themes here. All right, now into Yule. This is a very hard subject because Yule, once again, is something that is very much celebrated across the heathen and pagan community. It just seems like what is done during Yule and when Yule is celebrated is the thing in question. It seems most common that people celebrate Yule around the winter solstice. I'll cover it a little bit at the end of this video, but mostly it comes from the lunar and solar calendar. But before moving into that, so Yule. In A Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru, there are several Yule rituals that are mentioned, including Mother's Night or Decierblot. There's also a mentioning of an Odin's Night, of a Sunday. And these are things that sound like great traditions. I know I will be personally doing a Sunday at Yule, but again, it seems like we don't really know what the pre-Christian Scandinavian or Germanic societies actually did during this time. Of course, we have the most evidence for Yule when it comes to the saga of Harken the Good. This has been a great resource for a lot of people to base a lot of our assumptions on Yule. It seems like there was a feast. It seems like there were sacrifices, that what was sacrificed was eaten. There was swearing of oaths on hams. There was lots of drinking and celebrating. And then, of course, you have the wild hunt around this. So we definitely know the most about Yule, but the actual specific details on how it should be practiced and celebrated today are once again something shrouded in mystery. We know there was a Yule, we know that a feast happened, we know a celebration happened, but once again, it seems like most societies have some form of winter holiday simply because it is getting cold, you don't know who's going to survive into the next year, so you're going to have some kind of gathering or feast to celebrate your time with your friends and family before the true winter takes on. So why are there so many misconceptions? I mean, there's so many holidays I haven't even covered. It just seems like these are the most common holidays within the heathen Asatru pagan community. So there's a few factors into this. Factor number one is the lunar and solar calendar. So we for the most part can infer that the pre-Christian Scandinavian and Germanic societies followed a lunar calendar. But the consistency of this calendar is not very well known. There are a few recreations that exist. This lunar calendar that has been reconstructed may be close, but is not going to be 100% accurate to what the ancestors used. And so if you do want to go based off a lunar calendar, essentially you're going off of the full moon cycle, and you'll have a 13-month year, but I think there's like 9-year cycle where there's a leap month or something like that. It's pretty complicated. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but yes, technically, historically, the lunar cycle for your holidays is more accurate to how the ancestors did it. Where did the sun wheel come into this? The solar cycles come in. Now, this came in from intermingling between Asatru and Wiccan groups in the 1970s. Wicca definitely became more popular in this time and definitely outnumbered Asatru and heathen groups by quite a lot. And so the people that were more strictly Asatru, heathen, or Norse Pagan kind of intermingled and shared ideas, and eventually the ideas that are now the common thought, such as celebrating your holidays on the equinoxes and the solstices, comes from Wiccan influences. Now, this isn't a bad thing. I am not saying it's a bad thing, but we do have to know where a lot of our information and our modern practices come from. And honestly, without these Wiccan influences, we probably wouldn't even have half of what we do today as far as practitioners of this religion. So, laid out the facts. Holidays that we know now mostly come from the Wiccan influences of the 1970s. There are people trying to reconstruct the lunar cycles and the lunar holidays of the pre-Christian Scandinavian and Germanic societies. We know very little about how those people actually practiced their holidays, and we know very little if they actually had these named holidays. So we don't know what to name them historically. We don't know when they were celebrated historically, and we really don't know the details. So we're kind of shooting in the dark, but ultimately, this kind of comes into what this channel exists for. What my personal beliefs in all this is yes, I want to influence our present with the past and, take what we can and try to be the best we can in being historically respectful, but at the same time, we are the people carrying the torch into the future. And we can infer that it seems like there was a ritual in the spring, it seemed like there was something in the summer, it seems like something was in the fall, and it seems like something was in the winter. We can't say what those dates are, we can't say what those names are, but we can definitely say the pre-Christian Scandinavian and Germanic societies most likely celebrated at these times. We just can't say how they did it, what they did, when they did it. So what do we do now? Where does this leave us as modern practitioners in this faith? You can go the Reconstructionist route. I wish you all the best, but it just doesn't seem like there's enough information to really reconstruct anything. Personally, what I do is just go by the solstices and the equinoxes. I've learned so much by doing this. Midsummer was a great experience for me. Going through the entire day of 14 hours of sun teaches you a lot. And now moving into Yule on the winter solstice, having only 7 hours of daylight and having mostly darkness, that is an interesting thing to realize. And ultimately, it comes down to experiences. Are you feeling something on these holy days? And yeah, we're celebrating Yule on the 11th through the 14th here in Kentucky. It's not the solstice, but will we probably feel something? Will we feel connected to the gods? Probably. And so I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. Around the fall time, I feel something. And I feel something that maybe calls me to the ancestors and calls me more to the natural world. And so when we had a fall gathering, I felt more connected to those things, whereas Midsummer, I didn't feel as connected. So it seems like all of these different days, all of these holy days are never going to be something everyone in this community agrees about. But I think what we can agree about is that there are special times of the year, mostly going around the seasonal times, and those times are going to be different for everyone. I mean, if you live in, Mexico or Africa, it's going to be a lot different to celebrate these gods than if you live in the United States, or even if you live in Arizona versus Kentucky. It's going to be very different. But for me, following the solar cycle makes sense, and following the cycle of our weather, because this is the natural part of our world, and ultimately we are trying to connect to the natural elements of the world we live in. And within those natural elements and within ourselves is where we find the gods. I find it exceedingly wonderful to find these things together as a group. So we may not ever celebrate our holidays on the same day as our ancestors, but at least we are celebrating. At least we have days we hold sacred. Personally, I'm not too picky on these final dates. I'm not picky on what exactly is held in these days. Modern traditions and culture is going to form around this faith, and that's something we cannot escape. And we live in something that came from, in the 1970s and the 80s, the influences from there. We're being influenced now by the wonderful research done by people that care for the history. We have two sources. We have something that comes from the 1970s, something that comes from these Wiccan influences that have carried this faith into now. And now we have more modern publications talking about the historical influence of this. So these two things combined can create what we believe now. And I think that is the power of this faith. We're moving forward into the new age. We're moving forward as a society and as religion with these two ideas combined. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has helped you in your research. I hope to celebrate with you one day. Let everyone know down below what holidays you celebrate, what you hold special. Again, this is about experiences. If you feel something in the spring, if you say, I'm going to celebrate Ostara, own it. Do some great rituals. You will feel something, and tell us about it. But folk, until the hall, until we celebrate together, Skål.